My grandparents came to Colombia in 1934 as Alliance missionaries. My grandfather began his ministry by selling New Testaments and Bibles and books at a little stand outside of their house. And there were people who would meet with them and begin to get close, and they would lead them to Christ, and those people would head back up into the mountain areas and often would be persecuted for becoming believers. That was hard, but they persisted. They would invite my grandfather to go up to their community along the mountainside. Small churches would be planted within those very rural areas, 9,000, 10,000 feet in a river. They would be baptized, and they would tie ropes around my grandfather, and they would tie a rope around the person who was going to be baptized so that they wouldn't get washed away in the river. There was a lot of religious persecution during the 1940s, early 1950s. In the 1950s, then it became basically political opposition to the gospel. They wanted to push the evangelicals out. And the pastors that had been trained, they would often get beaten or stoned. Their homes would be destroyed, and they would be forced to move away from their community. It became so dangerous to the point that there were pastors who were killed. Some missionaries were threatened and had to move. One of the missionaries, she was a single missionary, and she lived on a side street in one of the smaller communities, but she left her window open, and she woke up and found under her bed a stick of dynamite had been thrown in through her window. You know, that was a dangerous time, and that was a time when my parents finally came to Colombia as missionaries. So I have stories from my parents, my dad, and a very special friend who was a pastor, has been a pastor for years here. When they went out that morning, we prayed for them to go out. They were going to go preach in a small town. And they went, and the religious leaders there stirred up the people, and they smashed the car, and they beat my dad, and they beat the Colombian pastor. And that evening, they didn't come back the time they were supposed to, and so late that night, they finally showed up, and my dad's face was just a mess. And the Colombian pastor was even worse than my dad. You know, it was really hard to see that they had suffered for preaching the gospel. But in that place today, there's a church. There's an Alliance church. And I met the pastor here just a couple days ago. And he wanted me to know the seed that that planted is there. And God is faithful. God is faithful. So, you know, even though it can be hard, we came back too. My wife and I came to Colombia as Alliance missionaries. It's about getting the gospel out, and it was rough. And persecution continued. Alliance pastors were killed by the guerrillas and by the narcotraficantes in the 80s and 90s. So it's been almost 60 years of violence that this church has faced. And it's persevered. And God has been faithful. And the church has persevered and been planted in the rural areas and in the cities. This is a strong church in that respect. Today we're celebrating 100 years of the Christian Missionary Alliance in Colombia. And last night, as we celebrated with the national church, I was just overwhelmed as one of the Colombian senators presented to the national church a commendation for being here in Colombia and for the work that they've done and for standing for truth and presenting the gospel and being a community that impacts in a complete way, a holistic way, the communities that they're involved in. And I can say, you know, after all of this, 3 generations, that it's definitely worth it. All the pain, all the hurt, it's been worth it.